I first noticed the mirror in the bathroom the day I moved in. It was an ordinary mirror, at least at first glance, mounted above the sink square. With a simple metal frame, the bathroom itself was cramped tiles, yellowed with age, and a single overhead light that flickered sometimes. When I switched it on the mirror, it looked like it belonged there, nothing out of place. But that first night, when I leaned over the sink brushing my teeth, I thought I saw a movement in the reflection, a flicker behind me. I froze, every muscle in my body, and turned slowly. There was nothing behind me, just the bathroom door closed and the small towel rack hanging empty. I told myself I was tired, maybe imagining things. The house was old, the wind had rattled the windows all day. I shrugged and finished brushing, but every time I looked at the mirror, I felt a faint unease. The next morning, I woke early and went to the bathroom, the air cold and dry, as though the house itself had absorbed all warmth overnight. I looked into the mirror and froze. The reflection was normal at first, but then the corner of my eye caught a shift. The metal frame seemed darker, a shadow running along its edges. It wasn't my own reflection, but something behind the glass moving with a subtle delay. I leaned in closer, and my breath fogged the surface, briefly hiding it. But when it cleared, the reflection of the bathroom was wrong. The tiles darker, the light dimmer, and the door farther away than it was in reality. I tried to touch the mirror, but the surface was colder than metal, almost as though it was alive. A slight vibration ran beneath my fingertips like a pulse. I pulled back in horror, and the reflection snapped back to normal. At the speed of a blink, I stepped out of the bathroom, shaking my head, and ignored it for the rest of the day. I tried not to think about it, but that night, when I returned, the feeling had grown stronger. I had begun to notice that when I entered the bathroom, no matter what time it was, the light seemed dimmer inside. The reflection of the room looked narrower, as though it were compressing the space. I opened the cabinet under the sink to grab a towel, and when I looked up into the mirror, the reflection of the cabinet was already open and empty. Though I had yet to reach, and I turned quickly to check the real cabinet and saw the towel was still there, I began avoiding the mirror. But the more I ignored it, the more insistent it became. I would catch glimpses of movement behind me in the reflection, or notice shadows stretching in impossible directions. It started small, at first a flicker, a hint of motion, but soon it became something heavier, as if the reflection was alive and aware of me. That night, I awoke to the sound of the bathroom door creaking open. I lay frozen in bed, listening, and waited for a voice, a crash, anything to explain what I had heard, but nothing came. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. I tried to convince myself it was the old wood settling, but then the sound repeated, only slower, deliberate, a metallic scrape across the tile floor that ended at the threshold of my bedroom door. I didn't move until morning, when light spilled across the floor. I got up slowly and checked the bathroom door. It was closed and locked from the inside, but the key was gone. I didn't remember locking it the day before. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Then I remembered the small chain latch at the top of the door. It was latched and the keyhole empty. I had no recollection of locking it, and no one else had access to the apartment. I lived alone. The realization hit me like ice in my veins. The mirror in that bathroom had become something I didn't understand, something that could control the door itself. I went to work that day, unable to focus, every moment spent replaying the image of the reflection, compressing the bathroom, narrowing the space, until it seemed like the walls themselves were pressing, and the idea that whatever was behind the mirror was watching and learning consumed me. I tried to forget it, but I couldn't. The mirror had somehow attached itself to me, to my movements, to my thoughts. When I returned that night, I was careful I didn't enter. The bathroom, I ignored it until exhaustion drove me to the edge of sleep in the living room. But I could hear faint noises, faint scratches and taps behind the locked door like tiny fingernails on tile. I pressed my ears to the wood, and the sound stopped immediately. I pulled back, and it started again, this time slower and heavier, almost like a heartbeat. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see it. I had to understand. I got a chair and climbed up the peak. Through the top of the door, the small chain. Latch gave me a view just above the metal frame of the door, and there was the mirror. Looked empty at first, just the bathroom reflecting itself. But as I watched a figure emerge behind the glass, faint at first, the shadow of a person. Just beyond the surface, no distinct features, but I could feel the weight of its gaze, as if it had been expecting me. The figure moved its head slowly left to right, scanning the room, and then it raised an arm pointing directly at me through the glass. I jumped down from the chair, stumbled back, my heart hammering. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The door remained locked. I could still hear soft shuffles behind it, the faint scrape of nails sliding across the tile, the subtle pulse of something breathing from the other side. And I realized then the truth that had been creeping up slowly, that the mirror didn't just reflect me, it trapped me, it observed me, it waited. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew it wasn't done yet. The second day after the mirror locked itself, the air in my apartment changed. It felt heavier, like walking through invisible water. Each room seemed darker, even during the day. I kept the bathroom door closed, avoiding even looking at it when I passed in the hallway, but I could still hear the faint sound of dripping behind the locked door, a slow rhythmic drop that never seemed to stop. I told myself it was a pipe or condensation, but deep down I knew it wasn't. The bathroom had no leaky pipes, no running water since the day the mirror had changed. I even shut off the main valve beneath the sink before it locked itself. Yet the dripping continued, always steady like a heartbeat. I tried to drown it out with music, but sometimes even through the headphones I could hear it, each drop echoing in my skull. By the third night, I started noticing something stranger. Every mirror in the apartment began to feel wrong. The hallway mirror near the entrance showed faint smudges, like fingerprints, though I never touched it. The dark TV screen reflected my living room, but the proportions were slightly off, as if the walls behind me had stretched a few inches wider one night. As I passed the screen, I thought I saw a movement behind my reflection, something shifting where the bathroom should have been. I turned expecting to see the closed door, but the hallway was empty. I began to dream about the mirror. It started, small glimpses of my own reflection watching me while I slept. Then the dreams deepened. I saw the bathroom door wide open, the light flickering, and the mirror glowing faintly white. I would walk closer each time, feeling something pulling me forward until my hand touched the cold glass. Then I would wake up, gasping every time. With frost on my fingertips, the sound of dripping grew louder. That week I started recording it with my phone, but when I played the audio back, all I heard was static under the static. However, there was another sound, something low and distorted, like a voice caught in the static, saying something I couldn't quite make out. One morning, I decided to call a locksmith. I told him my bathroom door had jammed from the inside. He arrived that afternoon and started working quietly, fiddling with the handle and latch. When he finally popped the lock, he frowned and asked if I wanted to open it myself. He said something felt strange, that it wasn't the mechanism keeping it shut, but pressure from the other side, like someone was pushing against the door to keep it closed. I didn't want to admit how much his words terrified me, but I nodded. He stepped back, and I slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open only an inch before stopping completely. The smell hit me first, metallic and damp, like blood mixed with Old Water, the locksmith's face went pale. He asked if maybe there had been flooding or something dead inside. I shook my head. He tried to push the door again, but it didn't move. He said he could remove the hinges, but I stopped him. I don't know why, maybe fear, maybe instinct, but I didn't want him to open it. Not yet, not until I understood what was happening. I paid him and told him I'd handle the rest myself. That night the sound behind the door changed. It wasn't dripping anymore. It was whispering, faint like breath against glass. I lay awake listening to it for hours. Sometimes it sounded like my own voice echoing words I didn't recognize, repeating them over and over, until they melted into silence. I couldn't make out the phrases. But one word stood out clear among the whispers: my name. When I gathered the courage to speak to it, I approached the door. Quietly, I said my own name aloud. My voice cracked. As I did, then from behind the door came the faintest reply, my voice exactly matching mine, saying the same name back. I stumbled away from the door and sat against the wall, trembling. My reflection was inside the bathroom, or something that knew my voice perfectly. I tried to rationalize. It may be the pipes, maybe a neighbor, maybe exhaustion, but no logic could explain how the whisper had my exact tone. By morning, I found new marks on the door, long streaks of condensation, as though someone had pressed wet hands against it from the inside. The air near it was cold, and every time I stood close, my breath turned white. It was impossible. The bathroom had no windows, no airflow. It was sealed completely, yet cold poured through the cracks like fog. I decided to cover the door with a sheet, a heavy blanket, to block the sound in sight. But that night, it didn't help. The whispering turned into tapping, slow, rhythmic, steady, as though counting. When I tried to sleep, the tapping echoed through the floorboards. The apartment seemed to vibrate with it, and I knew even without looking that the mirror was awake again. The next morning, when I checked the door, the blanket was gone, neatly folded and placed on the floor, and the door was locked again, this time from my side, the key resting in the handle. The whispering stopped completely, but I knew that meant something worse was coming. Silence never meant peace in that apartment. That evening, when I passed the hallway mirror, I stopped. The reflection of the bathroom door behind me was wide open, but in reality, when I turned, the door was still shut and locked tightly. When I looked back at the reflection, there was movement in the doorway, a faint shape standing perfectly still, its face blurry and pale, its head tilted slightly to the side, and it was smiling. For the next few days, I lived as though the bathroom no longer existed. I used the kitchen sink to wash and avoided the hallway at night. Still, the reflection lingered in my mind. The smile I saw that night felt more like a memory than a dream. Each time I closed my eyes, I could see that faint grin pressed against the glass. The thing behind the mirror wasn't trying to scare me anymore. It was waiting. The sound came back on the fourth night, louder. This time, rhythmic tapping like fingers against glass. 3 taps, then silence. 3 more. Then another pause. At first, I ignored it. I turned up the TV, but every gap in dialogue brought the noise rushing back, louder, clearer, closer, until it felt as if it was inside the walls. I pressed my palms against my ears, but it didn't stop. I could feel the vibration through my skull, steady, measured, almost calm. I went to the hallway and stood before the bathroom door. My chest felt tight. My hands trembled as I leaned close. I whispered, "Stop." I didn't expect an answer, but the sound halted instantly. Then came the faintest voice from behind the door, muffled, distant, familiar. "Do you want to see?" It wasn't a question. I understood. It was an invitation. The voice was my own again, but slower, softer, as though underwater. I backed away, shaking my head over and over, whispering, "No." The air grew cold, and I could see my breath in the dim hallway light. I spent the rest of the night sitting by the front door, afraid to move the next Morning, the entire apartment felt heavier, like gravity had shifted. Every surface was cold, even the floor under my feet. The mirror in the hallway no longer showed my reflection. Normally, my face was pale eyes, darker, sunken, as if something had drained color from me. Completely, I covered that mirror too, but when I passed it later that day, the blanket bulged slightly outward, as if something beneath it was breathing. That evening, I got a message from a coworker asking if I was okay. I hadn't been to work in a week. I didn't even realize that much time had passed. The days were blending together, and the only constant was the feeling that something was inside that bathroom waiting for me to open the door. I tried to force myself to believe I was imagining it. The logical part of my mind screamed to leave the apartment, but I couldn't. I told myself it was fear of embarrassment, fear that someone would think I'd lost my mind. But it was more than that. It was as if the house itself didn't want me to leave. When I did try, the door wouldn't unlock. The key turned, but nothing happened. The knob resisted me like it was welded in place. The hallway mirror across from it reflected me, trying over and over to twist the handle, but in that reflection my movements lagged a second behind, each turn delayed, slower, watching itself repeat. That delay was wrong, unnatural. I turned quickly, hoping to catch it, but my reflection didn't turn with me. It just kept watching, still, expressionless, head tilted slightly to the side like the shape in the bathroom doorway. I ran to the living room, shut off every light, and sat in darkness, hugging my knees, listening. The tapping had returned 3 taps, then silence again and again, until my mind began to fill in the rhythm with whispers. I thought I heard words between the beats, faint, distorted. Let me finish your face. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe hours, until exhaustion pulled me into sleep. When I woke, the apartment was silent, no tapping, no whispering, just quiet. Heavy air and faint daylight seeping through the curtains. For a moment, I believed it was over until I turned my head toward the bathroom door. It was open, not wide, just a sliver enough to see inside. The light flickered faintly. The air around it shimmered like heat off asphalt, though the room felt cold. I stepped closer against my own will. Every muscle in my body tensed. The smell hit me again, metallic, and when I reached the doorframe and froze, the mirror inside was no longer still. The surface rippled faintly like the surface of water. Beneath it, movement, shapes struggling to form, faces distorted, pressing outward as if trapped beneath the glass. I could see my own face among them, eyes wide, mouth open, silently screaming. Before it sank back into the rippling silver, the whispers returned, louder, dozens of voices, all using my tone, overlapping each other. Some spoke nonsense, others repeated things I'd said aloud days ago. Half sentences, fragments of thought, all coming back at once. Then every voice stopped, and one clear sound filled the room. Slow, deliberate breathing coming from behind the mirror. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut by itself with a force that rattled the walls. The handle locked, the lights went out, and I was left in total darkness. I could still hear the breathing, but now it was right next to my ear. I remember fumbling for the door, clawing at the handle, but when I finally pulled it open, I fell out into the hallway. Gasping, my clothes were damp, my hands shaking. I turned back to look inside. The bathroom was empty again, clean, dry, and silent. But on the mirror's surface, words had appeared, written in condensation like breath, forming letters slowly across the glass. Not done, yet I left the apartment that night and slept in my car. I couldn't stay there, not after seeing those faces pressed behind the glass. I sat in the driver's seat until sunrise, staring at the front door of my building, waiting for something to move, something to step out of that cursed place. But nothing happened. The world outside looked perfectly normal calm, as if the mirror's nightmare couldn't exist beyond the walls of that bathroom. I try not to go back, I really did. I spent 2 days in a cheap motel, but something followed me. Even there the television screen would flicker for no reason, and the bathroom mirror in the motel room would fog over even when the shower was cold. I caught my reflection moving differently once a second too. Late mouth, still speaking after I'd stopped. The moment I saw the delay, my stomach twisted, and I knew I couldn't escape by running away. It wasn't the apartment that was cursed, it was me. I returned home during the 3rd evening. Determined to end whatever had started, I carried a hammer with me, the weight of it steadying my shaking hands. The apartment was freezing inside, colder than outside. The lights flickered once, then held steady. The bathroom door was wide open, waiting for me. I walked in and stared at the mirror. It looked completely ordinary. Now, no rippling surface, no fog, no faint movements within the metal frame, even shone under the light reflecting my face. Perfectly, I almost laughed. A bitter dry sound. I lifted the hammer and hesitated for a moment. I thought I saw someone else in the reflection standing beside me. I turned quickly, but no one was there. When I looked back, there were 2 of me, one real, one trapped in the glass, both holding a hammer, both staring straight ahead. Then the one in the mirror smiled. It moved first, raising the hammer. Before I even began to lift mine, I froze, unable to look away. The reflection brought the hammer down hard, cracking the glass. From the inside, the sound was dull, muffled, as if coming from underwater. A spiderweb of fractures spread outward, but the surface didn't shatter. Instead, the cracks began to pulse, faintly glowing, a faint pale light that filled the bathroom. I dropped the hammer and backed away. The reflection still held its own tightly, its head now tilted, its smile widening until it looked unnatural, inhuman. The light flickered faster and faster, and I could hear something behind it scratching, clawing like nails, scraping to break through. Then silence. The light stopped flickering. The reflection was gone. The mirror was whole again. I stood frozen for what felt like minutes, afraid to move. When I finally leaned closer, I saw the surface, faintly distorted, a subtle depth behind the glass. As I stared into it, I realized there was something standing behind me in the reflection, something tall and thin. It wasn't human. Its outline stretched to the ceiling, long arms resting at its sides, its face nothing but a hollow void where eyes should be. I turned, but nothing was there. The air moved, though brushing my skin like a hand sliding past. I spun back to the mirror, and the figure was closer, right behind my reflection, its hand resting lightly on the shoulder of the version of me inside the glass. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall, and the light went out. I don't remember leaving the bathroom. I just remember waking on the floor hours later, the mirror perfectly still once again. The only difference was the reflection now lagged slightly. When I moved, just a second off, enough to make me feel sick. I try not to look at it, but I couldn't stop my eyes from glancing back every few moments. Each time the delay grew longer. That night, as I tried to sleep, the tapping started again, but this time it was everywhere, not just the bathroom walls. The sound came from inside the bedroom, the kitchen, even from the glass of my phone screen. 3 taps, pause, 3 more. It was trying to get through not just one mirror, but all of them. I threw a blanket over the bathroom door, nail boards across it, tried to seal it shut, but the sound came through anyway. I couldn't tell anymore if it was tapping or if something was trying to speak. The rhythm twisted into words that didn't sound like any language I knew, until I realized it wasn't a language at all. It was my voice speaking backwards every time I looked at my own reflection in anything glass, metal, polished surface, even the reflection of water in a glass. It stared back too long, smiled too wide, and moved a second too slow. I called a friend that morning. I tried to explain everything, my shaking voice barely coherent. He came over late that afternoon. I didn't want to let him in, but he insisted, saying he would stay with me until I got help. When he stepped inside, his eyes went immediately to the bathroom door. He frowned, said it sounded like water running inside. But I told him the pipes had been off for days. Before I could stop him, he unlatched the boards and turned the handle. The door opened easily this time. As if it had never been locked at all, he stepped inside before I could pull him back and stopped staring at the mirror. I shouted his name, but he didn't answer. His reflection didn't match his body. It was facing me, while his real self stood perfectly still facing the glass. Then the mirror rippled, once like the surface of a pond. A reflection of my friend smiled and raised its hand as though waving. The real one didn't move. I reached forward, grabbed his arm, and yanked him out. The door slammed shut behind us. He stared at me, confused, asking what had just happened, but I could see it, his reflection in the window beside him, still facing the bathroom, still smiling. The light flickered, then steadied, and he stopped speaking mid-sentence, turned his head slowly, and said in a low, calm voice, it still opened. The bathroom door behind him creaked slowly wider, even though no one touched it. The reflection of both of us appeared in the window beside the door. The other version smiled together in perfect unison. Then both raised their hands and pointed at the mirror. That was the moment I realized what the voice behind the glass had meant. It wasn't trapped on the other side of the mirror anymore. It had simply been waiting for me to bring someone else. And now there were two of us reflected inside. I don't remember the moment the door shut again or when the lights went out. I only remember the silence that followed, the heavy, thick silence that presses into your skull until you start hearing your own heartbeat louder than anything else. The apartment felt smaller somehow, like the walls were moving closer. The air hung still and wrong, like the breath of something that wasn't supposed to exist. I could feel the bathroom waiting for me. My friend had gone home, or maybe he hadn't. I couldn't tell. When I called his phone, it rang, but no one answered. Later that night, I saw his car still parked outside the building, and for some reason the headlights were on, dimly glowing against the wet pavement. I tried to go outside, but the door wouldn't open no matter how hard I pulled. The locks wouldn't move, the knob wouldn't turn, and through the small peephole I could see only blackness. Beyond the house was dead quiet until I heard the dripping again, faint and steady, not water this time, something thicker. I followed the sound back to the bathroom door and saw a dark stain spreading slowly beneath it. The smell was sharp like rust. I pressed my ear against the wood, and there was breathing, slow and deep, right on the other side of the door, matching the rhythm of my own, until I realized it wasn't matching mine. It was guiding it like it wanted me to follow along. I forced myself away from the door, but every mirror in the house had changed. The one in the hall showed the back of my head. Instead of my face, the one on the closet door showed the bathroom behind me, even though it was down the hall. And the one in the kitchen window reflected me, still standing in front of the bathroom door, even though I was nowhere near it anymore. Something had broken between what I saw and what was real. The glass wasn't showing reflections anymore. It was showing memory, maybe, or something worse, something that could move between both sides. That night, I stopped sleeping. Every light stayed on, but the reflections stayed dark, like each one was filmed underwater. I tried to cover them, hang towels, blankets, anything, but the fabric would slide down. While I wasn't looking, I could feel something watching from behind the glass, its attention heavy like a hand resting on my shoulder. The tapping returned soft, rhythmic, like it was thinking, not knocking. I remember sitting on the floor in the living room, eyes fixed on the blank screen of the television. The screen flickered once, and my reflection appeared faint and pale behind me, only it wasn't. Doing what I was doing, it leaned forward closer to the glass. Even as I sat completely still, then it raised one hand and pressed it against the inside of the screen. The air went cold. I could see my breath. And then all at once, every mirror, every surface of glass in the apartment flickered to life, showing the same image of my reflection pressing closer all at once from every direction. I ran to the door again, pounding on it, screaming, but the sound didn't echo. It was swallowed up like the walls themselves were listening when I turned back one of the reflections had stepped out from the mirror. It didn't crawl or burst through. It simply appeared the way a shadow fills a room. When the light shifts, it looked like me, but wrong. Two still eyes, two open, no breath, fogging the air. It stood a few feet away and tilted its head the way I had when I used to check my own reflection for imperfections. Then it smiled and whispered without moving its lips. You left it open. I felt something wet on my hand. I looked down and saw my fingers streaked with a thin, clear liquid dripping from nowhere. I looked up and realized the ceiling above me was glossy and black, as if covered in glass. The reflection of the figure stood directly above me, smiling upside down, reaching down through its own mirrored ceiling, its hand pressed against the surface the way you might test thin ice, and the glass cracked. I woke up on the bathroom floor hours, or maybe days later. I couldn't tell. The apartment was silent and clean, no sign of water or blood or footprints. The mirror above the sink looked ordinary again, except for a faint hairline fracture that ran straight down the center. I stood slowly, dizzy, weak, my reflection looking back exactly the way it should. But when I turned to leave, my reflection didn't follow. It stayed in the mirror, staring straight ahead, unblinking. While I stood frozen, the longer I looked, the more it began to move slightly, its eyes rolling slowly upward until they met mine from the wrong angle. It smiled, that same stretched smile I had seen in every reflection before. I heard the faintest whisper almost inside my skull, "You're on this side now." The light flickered and went out. I could still see, though, the glow coming faintly from the mirror, a dull white shimmer like moonlight through fog. The reflection leaned forward, pressing its hands against the glass from the other side, and I realized it wasn't the reflection anymore. I was now. When people visit this apartment, they never stay long. They say the bathroom light never turns off even when the bulb is removed. They say the mirror always feels warm, like someone just touched it. And sometimes if they look too long, they see a face staring back from behind the glass, a face that doesn't blink, a face that moves half a second too late. They say the person who lived here disappeared, left everything behind. The police think I ran away or lost my mind, but I didn't leave. I can see everything perfectly from where I am. I can see every person who walks past the glass, every hand that reaches to touch the surface. Every time someone glances too long, I press back just a little so they'll know, so they'll remember that a reflection isn't always yours. Sometimes it's waiting for you to turn away so it can come through.